Greetings once again, church family. Can you believe it's week number 11 of meeting by way of live streaming? Next Sunday will mark 3 full months of this. Time flies when you're having a good time, I suppose. I'm glad you're able to join us though at this time. I encourage you all to continue to participate as much as possible. But I also want to encourage you to reach out to each other. To those who may not have been able to view all the services or classes, and also to those who have not viewed any, and encourage one another to reconnect and stay connected in this way until we're able to meet back together again in person. Our passage is another long one, but please join me at this time in reading Luke 8:40 through 56, chapter 8, verses 40 through 56. Now, when Jesus returned, the crowd welcomed him, for they were all waiting for him. And there came a man named Jairus, who was a ruler of the synagogue. And falling at Jesus' feet, he implored him to come to his house. For he had an only daughter, about 12 years of age, and she was dying. As Jesus went, the people pressed around him. And there was a woman who had a discharge of blood for 12 years. And though she had spent all her living on physicians, she could not be healed by anyone. She came up behind him and touched the fringe of his garment. And immediately her discharge of blood ceased. And Jesus said, "Who was it that touched me?" When all denied it, Peter said, "Master, the crowds surround you and are pressing in on you." But Jesus said, "Someone touched me, for I perceive that power has gone out from me." And when the woman saw that she was not hidden, she came trembling and falling down before him, declared in the presence of all the people why she had touched him and how she had been immediately healed. And he said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace." While he was still speaking, someone from the ruler's house came and said, "Your daughter is dead. Do not trouble the teacher anymore." But Jesus, on hearing this answered him, "Do not fear, only believe, and she will be well." And when he came to the house, he allowed no one to enter with him, except Peter and John and James, and the father and mother of the child. And all were weeping and mourning for her. But he said, "Do not weep, for she is not dead, but sleeping." And they laughed at him, knowing that she was dead. But taking her by the hand, he called, saying, "Child, arise." And her spirit returned, and she got up at once, and he directed that something should be given her to eat. And her parents were amazed, but he charged them to tell no one what had happened. It's hard to know what to think and what to say about this passage. There are so many questions that aren't easily answered, and there's not enough time to answer every question. Like, how did Jesus know someone in particular was touching him when everyone was touching him? And what does it mean that the power went out of him? Why did people laugh at Jesus when he said the little girl wasn't dead, but asleep? And many more questions. This is a story that makes us wonder as much as it informs us. It's a story within a story. The story of Jairus' daughter is interrupted by the story of the woman with the hemorrhage and ends with Jairus' daughter. Without the story of the woman, it might have ended up being just another healing story. A typical day in the life of Jesus, the healer. But nothing in Luke is typical. From the stilling of the storm, to the demoniac, to these two interwoven miracles, Luke is answering a question that his disciples asked back in chapter 8, verse 25. Who is this guy? This Jesus? We find the answer partly in what Jesus says, but it's most clearly demonstrated in what he does. So Jesus has been a busy man. These four miracles in chapter 8, verses 22 through the end, verse 56, all occur on the same day. Jesus and his disciples set sail in the morning, travel through a great storm that Jesus commands to be still, on to the other side of the lake into Gentile country, where he encounters a man with thousands of unclean spirits possessing and tormenting him. Jesus casts them out into a herd of pigs that run down a steep bank and drown in the sea. The locals aren't exactly pleased at losing their livelihood at the hands of this Jewish healer, so they ask Jesus to leave. He complies and gets in the boat and sails back across the lake to where their journey had begun. Throughout all this, it's just Jesus and his disciples traveling together until they get back home, where there's a crowd. Again, all on the same day. And now there's a crowd waiting expectantly. Jesus has gone from rejection on the Gentile side of the lake to a nice warm welcome. And he sets off right away at the request of the ruler of the synagogue to heal his sick daughter. The raising of Jairus' daughter is what frames the entire passage. Sandwiched in between Jairus encountering and inviting Jesus, and Jesus in turn raising her from the dead, is the woman with a chronic discharge of blood. Jesus is interrupted while on a mission to Jairus' house. All this occurs along a tight but very fluid timeline. Here mashed together are two completely different issues, two completely different people, two different problems to solve. There's a 12-year-old girl who is sick, so ill, in fact, that she's on the verge of dying. But no one knows how critical she actually is. All Jesus has to go by is a very concerned father who has thrown himself at Jesus' feet and is begging him to come and heal her. Jesus should be getting used to this by now. Everyone has been begging him for something on the other side of the lake. Now a desperate father is begging for his daughter to be healed. Yes, they were quite different. Their issues are different, but there are a few things that are shared by both. The girl is 12 years old. The woman has had a chronic discharge of blood for 12 years. Basically, as long as the girl has been alive, the woman has been suffering with a condition that has completely stumped the medical community. There was no such thing as health insurance. So she was forced to spend her own money in search of a cure. She had depleted all of her resources, everything she needed to survive on. She spent it on doctors. It's interesting that in Mark's version of the story, Mark emphasizes that she spent all she had on many physicians. And not only didn't she get better, but she got worse. Luke, the physician, is briefer and less critical of others in his profession. But he agrees that nothing has worked. This isn't the first time Jesus has been interrupted while on his way to do something. It was something else. It won't be the last. But this time is different. in that it's the most blatant and the most potentially shocking interruption. Some speculate that if Jesus hadn't been interrupted here, he might have gotten to the girl in time to heal her, rather than having to raise her from the dead. It's an interesting theory, but doesn't it better highlight the power and authority of Jesus that even an interruption like this cannot diminish his mission? And how much more amazing is it that he could resurrect a girl from the dead as opposed to simply healing her? And maybe that's why the story played out this way. I see similarities here with Jesus raising Lazarus from the dead in John chapter 11, where Jesus was also delayed. And before he was able to arrive, Lazarus had passed. It's the miracle of raising him from the dead that casts light on who Jesus was and is, and gave him the opportunity to highlight his own future resurrection. But our passage more closely parallels Jesus raising the widow's son in Luke chapter 7, verses 11 through 17. He was her only son. And here, the girl is Jairus' only daughter, as Jesus is God's only son. The only begotten is the word, same word. Both acts of Jesus in our passage involve Jewish law. Unbeknownst to either Jesus or the crowd, an anonymous woman is among them who is ceremonially unclean. This is a serious matter. According to Leviticus 15, 25 through 30, she is impure, unclean, and everything she touches becomes unclean. And everyone she touches becomes unclean. And touching anything that she touches also renders one unclean. They are all in danger of defiling the tabernacle of God, all by virtue of nothing more than association. She is unclean in her own home, unclean in society, and unclean in the synagogue and the temple. She's taking a huge, life-changing risk by coming near them at all, let alone getting close enough to touch Jesus. You can't help but think about the woman in Luke chapter 7 who came to Jesus at Simon's house, who abandoned pride and fear and washed Jesus' feet with her tears and wiped them with her hair. But how did this unclean woman, how did she insert herself in the crowd? There was no effort at all on her part to practice social distancing. She risked everyone. She was determined and highly motivated. Once inside and among the crowd, how did she manage to get close to Jesus? Luke says the crowd was pressing in on him, literally, nearly crushing him. It's the same word Jesus used in the parable of the sower when he describes the seed that fell among the thorns, that grew up and choked the plants. Same word. And she found a gap somehow and managed to reach through and catch just the fringe of his garment. She didn't grasp it or hold on to it. Her touch did not linger. She only managed to barely make contact. She brushed her hand, maybe just the tip of her finger, barely against the fringe, just enough to qualify as a touch. Maybe Benjamin Franklin should have been standing by with the key on a piece of string tied to the woman's hand. It was electric. Luke says immediately she was healed. There was no time delay of any length at all. Like touching a bare wire plugged into an electrical outlet. There was no warning. Not even a nanosecond of time passed. A flash. And before the flash had faded, she was already healed. Her chronic 12-year ordeal, the hemorrhage of blood, was gone. Can you imagine the mix of emotions? She would be relieved and frightened at all at one time, terrified. She was trembling, shaking uncontrollably. Jesus asked, "Who touched me?" Well, the way Luke words the story, it's clear that Jesus already knew. And the story comes to a screeching halt. It paused right here in order to expose what has taken place. Jesus stops. The crowd stops. Who touched me? Peter said to Jesus. Everyone is touching you. Yet everyone denied it. Though the woman tried very hard to remain anonymous. Jesus is questioning and then looking around and apparently looking at the woman because she realized she had been exposed, Luke says, caused her to fall at Jesus' feet and compelled her to address not Jesus, but the crowd and tell her story and how she had been healed immediately. And Jesus highlights her faith. He says to her what he had said to the woman at Simon's house in chapter 7, verse 50. Your faith has made you well. The word means saved. It has saved you. Same word. Go in peace. But wasn't it the power that came out of Jesus that healed her? If it's only a matter of God's power and ability to defeat any and every force that exists, if he's only interested in irresistible, 100% compliance to his will, if he is powerful enough to override free will in such a way as to accomplish even the impossible, then why give the woman the option or false hope of ever finding a cure? Couldn't he have made us disease-free and immune to any ailment that might strike us? Immune to COVID-19? Couldn't he have made a world without storms, without demons, without death, without sin? Well, he actually did make a world without sin. We are the ones who injected sin into God's creation. Because God chose not to interfere with us with our free will, ever. Is faith really faith without the choice to believe and the option to act on that faith or not act on it? The woman could have drawn any conclusion she wanted regarding Jesus. After spending everything she had, all of her resources on doctors, it might have been easier not to believe Jesus could heal her than to believe he could. What she demonstrates here is not simple mental acknowledgement of the truth of something. That's a basic form of faith, but it's not her kind of faith. And living with overwhelming proof, after living with it, of the hopelessness of her situation. She wasn't simply rolling the dice in a forlorn hope that maybe something magical would happen if she could only touch Jesus. It was so much more. Is it too much of a leap to assume that she may also have been a witness to at least some of the teaching and miracles of Jesus? If only from a distance. She'd have at least heard about him and all his mighty deeds. You'd have to have a pretty inflexible determination not to believe, a prior agenda to discount Jesus, to not put two and two together and come up with the right answer. You'd have to be like some of the religious leaders who seem to have a terminal case of JDS, Jesus derangement syndrome. No, she had faith. Faith that acts with confidence. Faith that boldly moves past disappointment and goes straight to the source of the power necessary for healing. The two stories create a sort of miracle loop. That is, they are mutually reinforcing. The authority of Jesus has already been demonstrated in the Gospel of Luke. His commands are irresistible. Neither storms nor demons nor disease of any kind have any option other than 100% compliance to his authority. So the woman is healed, not by a command, but by faith and a touch. Not Jesus touching her, but her touching him in a sneak blitz attack from behind at the fringe of his garments. On the other hand, the girl is brought back to life by both Jesus taking her hand and him simply calling her back from the dead. Healing the woman demonstrated unbridled power to restore her, which reinforces Jesus' ability to also raise the girl from the dead. Raising the girl reinforces the already demonstrated power of Jesus to heal. His authority is not merely in his words, but in his touch, his actions, and our actions. But it is also predicated on something equally significant: faith. The girl was dead, but was she actually dead or mostly dead? Our understanding of death is sometimes confusing because it's all over the map. We're influenced by historical, cultural, philosophical understandings. Because of how difficult it is to return from the dead, we don't have a lot of first-hand information. There are a few claims and testimonies from people who are thought to have come back, but there isn't a lot of verifiable proof. Certainly not then, in Jesus' time. The baseline reality is life and death are two sides of existence. Life is temporary, regardless of what food you eat, how much exercise you get, or how safe a driver you are. No matter what you do to try and hang on to it, life is temporary. Death, however, is permanent. It's kind of pointless to discuss what death is like, because we don't know. Or where your soul goes, your soul when you die. It's enough to know that at the point of death, all functions, all realities, and all perceptions of your life come to a screeching halt. Your lifeless body is kicked into an immediate state of decay and composition. Only memories remain, not your memories, but memories others have of you. Death's permanence is the primary foundation for grief. If it was temporary, we would simply wait for you to come back and not waste time crying about losing you. But it's permanent. They knew with 100% accuracy and total confidence that she was dead. It would be absolutely ludicrous to entertain any possibility at all that she might not be dead. So the only rational, logical, legitimate reaction to Jesus saying she was only sleeping was to laugh. And they did. They laughed because they knew beyond a reasonable doubt she was completely, permanently dead. Jesus touched her. According to Numbers chapter 19, verses 11 through 13, the girl is now unclean because she's dead, and touching her makes one unclean. He touched a dead, really dead, in fact, girl, and spoke to her. By his authority alone, he told her to arise. Same word that's sometimes translated resurrection. Come back out of the realm of permanent death, he calls her, and return to life. And she got up. A different word, but still another word that's often translated as resurrection. Be resurrected, he said, and she was resurrected. Her life reintegrated with her physical existence, and she immediately arose. But notice the contrast with the woman who was healed and the girl. One touched Jesus, the other was touched by Jesus. One was healed by virtue of her faith. The other required no faith at all on behalf of the girl. Although you could argue that her father's faith and maybe the faith of the crowd is what got Jesus to come to her to begin with. One was the target, the other was the interruption. But they both go together as two dimensions of a singular moment in time. Both had waited 12 years for this moment. Both were recipients of the power of Jesus to heal and to raise the dead. Both were unclean, but made clean by the power and touch of Jesus. It's not really necessary for us to spend a lot of time on Jesus telling the parents not to say anything to anyone. The timing wasn't right. Jesus hadn't yet set his face toward Jerusalem, as we'll learn in the next chapter, verse 50. So it simply doesn't work to let certain events get ahead of his story. It needed to be said to them because they were utterly astounded by what had taken place. They are eyewitnesses to things that are very hard to grasp, even overwhelming. What can we make of it? Sometimes the crowd is an obstacle. Sometimes we who are on the inside make it tough for those who really need Jesus now to get to him. The good news is faith can and will find a way. If you're determined, nothing and no one can prevent you from touching Jesus and being healed. That's good news. If you're looking for Jesus, it doesn't matter what you've tried to help yourself or how ineffective it was or wasn't. It doesn't matter how many times you failed. Jesus has the power to heal what's broken in your life. This is not a passage about faith healing, like you might see a televangelist claim to perform. Taken as a whole, these two miracles together tell us that following Jesus, exercising our faith in action, makes it possible for Jesus to make us clean. That's the point. A woman and a little girl had become unclean, untouchable. Jesus made them clean again. Jesus has the power and authority to restore unclean people and make them clean again. Interrupted, troubled, bothered, set upon, pressed upon. It didn't matter to Jesus. Ministry to others can certainly be like that. Not just ministry. When we use that word, ministry, we automatically breathe a sigh of relief, don't we? Whew, off the hook. He's talking about ministers. What he's saying is interesting, but has almost nothing to do with me. It applies to preachers or missionaries, maybe elders and deacons. But me? Nah. I have my life to live. The last thing I need is to be bothered by concerns about ministry. Having my life interrupted by the gospel would be inconvenient. The best seats are on the sidelines. The softest cushions are on the fringes, or just in the pews. No one bothers you along the edges. The margins are comfy and warm and cozy. I can see without being seen. When you get involved and start doing things, something else always comes along. The more you do, the more there is to do. But that's not how it works, church. We are all ministers. We need to set our hearts on following Jesus now. Press in tight. Get as close as you can. Touch him, and you'll be touched, cleansed, made alive. And along the way, you just might be interrupted by something amazing. In the interruptions in our lives, we find the real Jesus. Follow him now and let him interrupt us with the opportunities that are waiting to be discovered. Will you please bow with me? Righteous Father, we're so thankful for the interruptions. Not simply the interruptions that Jesus encountered, but the ones that are sent our way to help us to realize that it's not our agenda. It's not our timeline. It's not the things that we choose as ministry. But it's what you send to us as you send us out. Bless our congregation, our church. Bless all of us. Help us to see that we are called to follow Jesus in such a way that we are to be right there with him and experience life as it interrupts what we think we're supposed to be doing. It helps us to glorify you in amazing ways and see the opportunities that we often missed because we're following our own way. But bless as we pray. Bless our church. Bless each one in the hearing of this message. All to your glory and honor. In the name of your Son, Jesus.